I'm Candace Delmagna Rouge. I'm the founder of Ceremony. We have a booth in the back here if you want to check us out. We're helping people heal, honor, and celebrate the events of life. And we're pitching tonight at 6 o'clock if you can make that too. But enough about me. We're here to talk to the founders of Mile 2 today. I'd love to introduce Jorge Sanchez and Jeff Graley. Can you tell us a little bit more about Mile 2 for those that don't know?
Sure. Mile 2 we started about 6 years ago over in the Entrepreneur Center, the original one down in Webster Station. But Mile 2 is a cognitive systems engineering and software company that builds software that works at the speed of human decision making. So you're not waiting on your machines, you're not waiting on trying to fix the technology to do what you need it to do. It works at the speed you want to work through cognitive systems engineering and good software engineering.
Anything you want to add, Jorge?
Sure. This and started out as kind of a side project, which then matured into a small company, and now, 6 years after the introduction in the Entrepreneur Center over on Monument, we have grown to over 100 people so far.
I definitely want to dive into that journey and that growth, that in 5 or 6 years, you've gone from 3 employees to now over 100, or is it over 150?
It's about 120, I think,
Okay.
today, but tomorrow we'll hire somebody else.
Yeah. But before we get there, maybe you can take us back to 5 years ago, right at the same time when the Startup Week was launching, is kind of when you guys were launching. And I think what's really unique about your story that maybe a lot of people don't know is that you came out of a really unique program also through the Air Force. Can you tell us about those early days and how it got off the ground?
Yeah, absolutely. I think everybody's already heard it a couple times this morning. None of these journeys do you start on your own, right? So we engaged in things like Startup Grind early on. As I was in the Air Force, still working as a civilian at the lab, trying to figure out what I wanted to do with the rest of my life. I kind of gotten to the point where I knew that wasn't it, and I needed a different journey. I was working with Jorge on some projects, and through some of those conversations with connectors in the community, people like Rob Slater, he's like, hey, you know some software guys. I know a company that needs some work done. You want to see if they're interested? So I brought that to Jorge and Rob, another Rob, the other Rob. And they started Mile 2 actually as a side business to be able to execute that work. But it's funny how those little things tip off these cascading events. So while that was going on, the Air Force decided that they wanted to look at entrepreneurship and tech as a way to do tech transfer and commercialization of the technologies inside defense. And taking advantage of that opportunity and knowing I was frustrated, I was like, yeah, I'll help you figure that out. So I raised my hand and volunteered. As a part of that, I got an opportunity to go to Silicon Valley and go to these other places that were these strong startup communities to try to get a better understanding of what it looks like to leave the lab and get caught by the outside community. And through those conversations with Scott Korndike and the Entrepreneur Center, trying to help position Dayton to fill in some of those gaps to allow people to successfully leave the lab, take a technology, and start a company. As with all bureaucracies, I knew even though they approved the program, it would take them a year to actually put that policy in place because it's the government and they're slow. So I actually convinced Jorge and Rob to quit and go start Mile 2 before the program even officially kicked off. So I call myself a pathfinder for EOP, maybe not the first to go through it officially.
All right, so how did he get you to get on board? Did he bribe you?
A little bit, right? So it was like a one beer conversation, right? So in every story, right, we have like both sides. At that time, I was, so when Jeff was doing all of his pathfinding, I was going through my master's program at Wright State. And at that time, he was exploring a couple of options, and I put the work forth to do some research with Jeff on some of the things that I was working on. So my master's capstone class, right, my project, ended up being about transcranial direct current stimulation, which has nothing to do with what I do, but it gave me a lot of research experience and a lot of just putting the work forth. And I connected with Jeff, and at the same time, I was just working on different projects at the Air Force. So the actual meeting where we said, yeah, let's go forth and start up Mile 2 happened after pretty much almost wrapping up that first engagement that we had as a commercial entity, as a side project. And we were just talking about the future of what we're going to do, and we were also very well aligned that it made sense. Like, yeah, let's just jump in it with 2 feet and just start it out.
I love it. So let's take it forward now. It's 5 years, 120 employees later. Talk to us about that growth.
It's in stages for sure, right? So you're that scrappy startup for the first couple years. It's saying yes to almost anything that comes in the door and trying to find your identity. We're not a product company, so we weren't selling a widget. It's a lot easier, in my opinion, to kind of find your niche and define what you're going to do when you're a product company. We sell expertise in different types of engineering, and that's a little harder because you can say yes to a lot of things. So we kind of had a wandering path. Took on projects that we shouldn't have, had customers and clients that showed us a lot of grace as we were making some of those mistakes. But that was a stage that lasted maybe 2 years, right? So around, I guess, 4 years ago, we moved into 444. We had 15 people. 444 was opening up. I think we were the first person to sign a lease there, and we were hoping that somebody else moved in there, and we wouldn't be in that building all by ourselves. So that 15-person stage was another kind of little threshold that it just felt different. There was more coordination. There was more critical mass, more expertise, so you could actually take on more. But I think that's when you had to start managing a little bit at that stage too. So that was super interesting for us. And again, still cobbling together little projects that lasted maybe a quarter, 6 months. I don't think we had anything that was a year long, maybe one at that point. So you're constantly still in that hustle mode, right? And just kind of bouncing on timelines. We recently had somebody leave Mile 2 that we absolutely love. And he said he actually loved Mile 2, you know, even though he was leaving. But it was very much, he's like, we're not scrappy anymore. Like, I like working at scrappy software companies, and 120 people, we're becoming a business that's, you know, needs resiliency, needs some process, needs some of these things. It's not scrappy anymore. So it's interesting to hear those stories through other people's eyes too, right? He's like, really enjoyed my time here, really enjoyed what we did. I'm gonna go join another scrappy company. And at least for us, early on, we decided we didn't wanna be bad people in all of this. Try to do what's right for people regardless of the situation. So we started very early on. If somebody left, they're Mile 2 alumni, right? It's a framing that a lot of people, they used to work here or whatever, you know, and kind of take a negative approach a lot of times. We chose not to do that. Like, let's treat it like a university or a high school and say, you're alumni. You'll always be a part of our Mile 2 journey, and nothing's going to change that.
Love that. Can you tell us a little bit more about the culture? So I know this has been something that's been really important to both of you. How are you scaling that? How are you growing it as the company continues to grow?
So it's always been important to do the right thing, like Jess said, right? So we try to always not maximize our profit as owners, but try to share in the growth that the company has experienced. That means that we put forth a whole lot of training opportunities for our employees, opportunities to come up with different types of work that they want to do. I mean, within the bounds of what we can do, right? Like when we were 15 people, it was a lot easier to just say like, all right, well, we're going to propose something in the space that you really want to do because we don't have a singular focus. Right now, it's been more of let's grow everybody in these skill sets that we can all kind of share together and grow from and learn from each other. One interesting story was somebody that interviewed with us, and she was kind of seeing a lot of the growth that we were having, and she wanted to dye her hair purple, and she asked us, hey, is this allowed here? We're like, yeah, go ahead. Like it's cool. So just letting people be people and not trying to adhere to a strict dress code and things like that, as long as nothing's offensive. Just be good people to each other, and that's something that we keep pushing forward.
What do you look for in somebody joining the team? Are you looking for certain qualities or characteristics to see if they're a fit?
So I want to riff on this one because I think the value of these kind of conversations is honesty, right? So we're actually in a funky stage. So we hired for culture early on, and even to this day, you hire for culture. and we can teach you the skills. But that can go, start to get defined in funky ways. So one of the things that we're actually working on now is, have we over-defined our culture and made it so tight that people that are a really good fit for what we need and have the talent that we need, our culture's too narrowly defined to accept them. So, and kind of mixing things like style and culture, they're not the same thing. So we're actually going back to the basics and saying, okay, the values that we put forward, our values should be an expression of our culture. That should be our anchor that we can go back to and interpret behaviors and interpret interactions and define our culture that way. So we're kind of stepping back and blowing out our culture a little bit because of that. I think over the 6 years it drifted. We were so serious about it, and it was so important to us. It's almost like you squeezed it too tight. So now we're starting to broaden that out.
That's a huge lesson for so many of us, because we always hear like culture is the biggest factor for your business. So it's nice to hear how that has to evolve as a company evolves. What are those values that you were talking about, and are the values changing as the culture changes, or is that the same?
No, that's been, I think, the good thing. So we're really thoughtful, and again, it's back to all these pieces. And for the big companies, this is where I would say, please listen to this. So Greg Meredith stood up Startup Grind in Dayton probably 7 years ago. He was a year or two ahead of everybody else in the whole startup scene here in Dayton. And we were going to those, and we got to know Greg. And Greg was working for Brixey Meyer doing some of their leadership and consulting and business consulting practice. And when we decided to sit down and put a strategy together and come up with our core values, we called Greg, because we knew Greg. We had built that relationship over a couple years and said, hey, that's a guy we trust and know. Can you work with us, because we don't have any money, so let's work something out. So he tailored it down to where we could do that. But if Brixey Meyer didn't allow him to do that, we would have never ended up at Brixey Meyer doing management consulting. But to your point, the values that we set up at that time, and that was when there were 3 of us involved in it at that time. We had about 12 employees, but there were 3 of us that helped design those. They still ring true. It's the same ones. We were very, very thoughtful about them. And we recently hired a CFO in January, a new CFO. And one of the things she pointed out when she went to our website, she goes, those are real words. She's like, I've worked in enough places when you go look at companies' values, they're words, but they don't mean anything. You could interpret it 1,000 ways. You have enough specificity to yours that I could kind of see what it should look like. So being really thoughtful about those values, you can keep them for quite some time.
Beautiful to hear. Can you talk to us about some of the growing pains that you guys have had out, whether it's the culture or the processes or whatever, going from that scrappy startup to a real tangible business? And how have you worked through those growing pains?
So again, let's make it personal, right? It's hard to shift our responsibilities and our roles over time. The leader that Mile 2 needs now, the leadership that Mile 2 needs now, is not what it needed year 1, 2, and 3. So that's something we've had to adjust, and you can talk about your experience, but for me, that, over the top, aggressive, we're just gonna run as fast as we can, and I'm just gonna push everybody as hard as we can, doesn't work now. That doesn't scale. So becoming a more thoughtful leader, becoming a more well-rounded leader, I don't know that I've achieved either of those things, but it's something I'm working on, because I think that's what the organization needs. And if I want to continue to be a part of it, I'm going to have to evolve. From day one, I looked at it and said, hey, they fired Steve Jobs from Apple. They sure as hell can get rid of me from Mile 2. So if you can get rid of Steve Jobs at Apple, you're at risk too. So I need to evolve.
In my case, I was the product starting out, right? Like, we sold services, and I was an engineer selling my expertise. And then later on, I was a technical lead, and basically making sure that essentially the work that we were providing was appropriate. At this level right now, I can't see everything and make sure that everything is at the quality that it is. I need to trust people to do that. So my responsibilities have shifted tremendously from when we were here 5 years ago, and we would write code in bars and rooms with 3 other people, right? Like, you knew everything that was going on in the whole company. At this stage, there's no way that we can do that. So the responsibility just changes dramatically.
So how is your role shifting?
Well, at this point, I've been focusing more on the organizational level things like security and some of the IT work. We have hired a director as well for that, so I work closely with him to do that stuff. And then just working on strategic goals for the company, not so much on what are we doing on a day-to-day basis, but what will the company look like in the next 2 to 3 years.
Well, that's fascinating. Let's change gears here. So everyone says it's really good to have a founder team, right? Talk to us about the pros of being a dynamic duo here, and what are the cons?
So I'll tell you that having a founder partner is like having a wife partner, right? Like we are tied in the most, in a way that basically puts us together through a lot of our needs and wants, right? So in order to have that partnership, you need to be able to trust your partner that they will do the right thing. In our case, we were well matched because Jeff did a lot more of the sales and management early on, particularly, right? And I was, like I said, the product, right? So I could go out there and talk nerdy and help him do the technical sales piece, and then deliver. So at least early on, that's what I saw our partnership as. You know, as things evolve, responsibilities change, and you just basically need to be in good communication with your partner. What else do you have?
Well, I think a couple things. I think you got to be intentional about your relationships. No matter what your relationships you have, particularly when it's things like business or marriage, it's easy to build up animosity. So you got to constantly be working to make sure that you're communicating, you're working on everything together, so that you're not building up this like hidden animosity, right? The other thing that we started with, and we say this a lot at Mile 2, there's no bad actors. So if we assume that somebody's not doing it for a bad reason, there's something that's missing in their model. So let's just talk. And if we come at it that way of, they're not a bad actor, we're just misaligned. We talk about alignment a lot. And just working, that's to us what coordination is. Working to maintain alignment. And it's really easy, especially as you scale, to start to get misaligned, because not everybody can know everything, and there's not enough time to backfill everybody. So you got to kind of trust. I think the other really important thing is I've fought gray hair pretty well so far. I don't have very many, but I joke that I've named them like Jorge and HR and those kind of things. But on the being real though, you need people to hold you accountable, right? That's where duos and partnerships and those kind of things are very, very valuable, because your model of the world as an individual tends to be fairly narrow. So those interactions and those conversations with other people allow you to broaden that model and be more thoughtful and successful, in my opinion.
So can you talk to us about happiness, about stress, about the life of a CEO and what you thought it was going to be, or the CTO, what you thought it was going to be and where it is now? And is it the dream that you thought? What is the role of happiness versus the dream coming true?
So, interesting question. I don't know that I necessarily dedicated a whole lot of brain cells to that. But in the beginning, the stress was welcome. I would work nonstop, and you're always on, right? So it's a thing that brought me joy in the beginning, just being busy and enjoying, like immersing myself in the work. One thing that I didn't mention, right? I had a daughter like a month after I started Mile 2. So she's 6 years old right now, and she's like Mile 2 is like my third baby, right? Like my oldest. So being in a position right now where we have a lot more resources than when you're in the beginning scrappy mode allows you to have a little bit more time to reflect and think like, hey, there are other parts of life than work, right? So at least in my case, right, like I enjoy the outdoors in Dayton. There's a surf wave around here close by in the river. I make sure to make time for some of the pursuits that I enjoy doing. But at the same time, right, the work needs to keep going. So the balance, I think, comes to us, or you make sure that it comes.
Yeah, and for me, happiness is maybe a weird thing. I'm wired to never be satisfied, so it's really weird to talk about happiness. Pride, I think, is something that I can push on there a little bit. For me, like I have teenagers, so I get a lot of pride of seeing them grow up and become good human beings, they're finding their paths, and be able to demonstrate what we've done at Mile 2 for them. Like, I didn't have a lot of those role models growing up. Everybody where I grew up was a laborer somewhere. So it's nice to be able to do that for them and for their friends, right? We've, again, changing the model for folks and for the community, right? I think one of the things I was frustrated with, insulted with maybe, when we first started, was how many people disengaged as soon as you said you weren't a product company. And I found that extremely frustrating. So, like, being able to be a successful services company that sells expertise in engineering, I take a lot of pride in that too, what we've been able to do and scale it. Again, it's these little trigger words, right? You're a lifestyle business. No, that's not our goal. That's not what we are, and that's not what we're going to be, right? So we're on a trajectory that's fantastic. And so those are the kind of things I take pride in. And you talk about stress, the stress of failing, I think that is always hanging over your head. For me, I took on quite a bit of debt to start this out from my perspective. So to be able to not have that anymore is a huge relief, because when that's hanging over you, that's tough. That's another piece. To be able to still be there for my kids, these kind of jobs and these kind of companies can be all consuming. You call it your third kid, and it does feel like that. But you have to be intentional about making time for your kids. So I still pick up kids from practice. I still go to every ball game that I absolutely can go to, which is most of them. The reason I miss them now is because there's two kids doing two things at the same time. It's divide and conquer. So don't sacrifice your relationships with your family, your friends, those kind of things to be successful. You can do both.
Yeah, because the family's going to be there at the end of the day, right? Can't sacrifice that. So you talked about that growth trajectory. What is that? Where do you want to take Mile 2?
So I would like to 5X our revenue over the next 5 years, which is extremely ambitious. That's hard to do at this scale. It's a lot easier to grow in these small little increments once you get bigger. It's easy to double every year when you're not making any money at the beginning, right? Once you get a pretty solid sized business, it's a lot harder to pull that off. But that's, again, back to partnerships. So community partnerships, having a good banking partner, having a good legal partner, because now you're starting to talk about acquisitions, whether it's somebody wanting to talk to you or you talking to other people to scale in different ways, right? Not just through contracts. Building those partnerships, so organizations like the Entrepreneur Center being a hub, no pun intended, or pun intended, I don't know. We're in the hub, right? Or next door. Anyway, that bringing the lawyers, the banking, the financial advisors, folks like that early on can tell you that everything's going to be okay, right? This isn't unique. You're not the first person to screw up your books this way. You're not the first person that's been in this kind of pinch. We can help you. And then when you start to get bigger, start to bring that advice piece to the bigger decisions that you're making, whether it's a bigger line of credit or, here, we did the due diligence on this organization. You should acquire them. We do think it's in your best interest.
So what's the role of those partnerships for you? Which ones have been the most powerful in your growth?
I'm not sure you can rank them. It's like phases of the company, right? I didn't have any interest in dealing with lawyers at all the first 5 years of Mile 2. And then all of a sudden you see, we really need to have a good lawyer. And we need to be able to leverage their expertise because we're in a world where that expertise matters. So Tom Whalen and the folks over at SSD have been fantastic for us as partners. Right Pac Credit Union took a chance on us early on. We talked to several banks when we were talking about a line of credit, and everybody wanted to give us just a little bit. And Mike, who we were working with, had run a software business before, had a good model for it, and actually gave us about 3 times more than anybody else would. And that actually was a catalyst for our growth. We had more working capital. We could hire people a little earlier, and we could get them, as a part of our culture, everybody on the same page before we started running a project.
If I can say there was one big one that was early on, the banking partner was the one, right? And so we would end up in weird cash flow situations where we had the money, but it's going to be delayed, a week from payroll. And being able to have that reserve to be able to say, okay, we'll just move stuff around, that helped us out tremendously. At least early on, that was the case.
Yeah, and I would say don't get caught up in other people's metrics, right? So much like I was talking about, oh, you're not a product company, that makes you a lifestyle business. Just the other day we were pitching something and the guy was completely offended, like couldn't wrap his head around that we didn't have VC backing. Why don't you have VC money? I'm like, why in the hell would I give away a part of my company when I don't need to? Like, why would I add ownership if I don't need to? I don't need somebody else's capital to do what we were proposing that day. So don't get caught up in other people's metrics because that can lead you down some weird paths.
What other tips do you have for entrepreneurs? Maybe your top 2 tips for the wannabes out here.
My top 2 are people aren't going to pay you. Be prepared for that. I thought everybody would pay you on time and be nice about that. They don't pay you on time. The second one is the perceived risk is higher than the actual risk. There's a lot of ways you can mitigate risk with partners like the entrepreneurship, with banks, with lawyers and other folks. So it's not as risky to start a business as most people perceive it is. So do your due diligence, put good partnerships together, and you can do it.
Jorge, do you have any top tips?
My biggest one would be just know what you're getting in, or at least have some feeling of what you're getting into. You're not going to know everything, but be prepared, right? So at least personally early on, I was ready to work the long hours. I had saved up a little bit, so I knew that we were going to be like a year or 2 without really getting a real paycheck. So there's multiple ways of doing it. You can have lines of credit and have debt. In my case, I was able to fund a lot of that myself without going too far into the debt side, which helped us out a ton. So that's really my big thing, is just be prepared, whatever that means to you.
I'm not a big fan of rules, so I'm going to do 3. The last one is everybody can handle the highs. That one's easy, right? Everybody, when things are going well, you need to be sure that you can handle the lows because they're coming too. It's an unavoidable part of your journey is you're going to hit some weird lows, something you thought you had in the bag, and then it just blows up, or again, somebody doesn't pay you or whatever. The lows are going to have, if you can't handle the lows, entrepreneurship is not for you because they'll come.
Never stop doing business development. Don't pause it. Even if you think that your pipeline is way full that you can handle, don't stop it.
My husband, he's in BD. Something that you just said I wanted to touch on, the lows. Talk to us about your guys, if you want to tell us a story about your lows, please do, but I'm most interested in how did you work through them? And those moments when you thought about quitting, what did you do? What are some of your strategies?
Yeah, I would say I don't know that I ever thought about quitting. So, and Jorge, I think, actually said it probably after one of our first or second kind of BD meetings with a customer. We walked out and we were standing in the parking lot. He's like, even if this doesn't work, I think I've ruined myself as an employee because I don't think I can work for anybody else again. And I don't think we even had a project at that time, maybe something small. So I think be prepared for that. It's such a mental change that you may not be wired to go back and work for someone else, which is a good driver to keep pushing to be successful. I think one of the big lows we had had partnered with someone, a bigger company. We had busted our butt to get this thing worked to be able to land it. It was the first real paycheck we were going to be able to get. And their legal sat on it too long and freaked out the customer, and the customer walked away. And I was just furious. There were so many emotions. One, I'm like, I'm still not going to get paid for months because that project fell through, and that was a big one. 2, I'm like, I put my trust into someone else's hands, and their bureaucracy broke it. Like, there was a lot going on there from a feelings standpoint. So it's another one. I think that's where we kind of got to never stop doing BD because we thought we had too much work when that thing landed to be able to do what we needed to do, and then it fell away, and there was hardly anything. So no matter how full your pipeline looks, it's never full enough.
What are your strategies when it's the low moment? How do you get out of it? The low point. if you're at a point like, yeah, everybody's got different techniques. That might be helpful.
Well,
for
I'm not a licensed therapist, but for me, I just went back to work. You just double down into it. You lean into it. I mean, when I'd get really pissed off about stuff, I'd go for a walk. More often than not. Worn out a lot of shoes. Sometimes I got tattoos. I got really mad one day and went and got a tattoo. So there's all kinds of coping strategies, some more appropriate than others. But yeah, you just got to lean into it.
What about you, Jorge?
So the low that I had in mind was earlier on, we had a group of people that quit at the same time. And once that first person starts to quit, that's a terrible feeling, right? And the coping mechanism for that is just what Jess said. There's nothing you can do about it. You just kind of push forward, recover from your situation, figure out how to recover from it, and do better next time.
So that's a good example. I still haven't come to terms with anybody leaving Mile 2. Why would you do that? That's madness. But I understand, and it's about, I look at it, no matter how good they are, it's an opportunity to upgrade. Right? So it's an opportunity. Look at things like opportunities even when they feel funky, and that framing helps a lot from not getting stuck in the pit.
Is there anything you guys would have done differently on your journey?
Sure, there's 1,000 things, but no. I'm not a regrets guy.
You can't do it with hindsight, right? Looking back on it, I think we've done the best we could in every situation. I don't know, maybe not every situation, but
we did what we thought was the best thing in every situation.
Right.
Don't we all?
And that's the commitment we tell our partners and the folks that work at Mile 2. We say it all the time. We're probably not right, but we're doing our best. And as soon as we recognize we're not right, we will work to correct it. So give us feedback. Use your voice to tell us when we're off. Because we always do things, no bad actors, so we're not bad actors either. We're doing things with the best of intentions, but sometimes we screw it up. When we do, make us aware, we'll make time to correct it.
I love that attitude.
We did it early on. There's a good example, good story there, I think. Healthcare is a nightmare. I think no matter where you sit in the ecosystem, it's a nightmare. No one enjoys it. But we did a plan that just looked like it was going to be great for everybody, and it was going to work for the company and our growth and all that kind of stuff. And within a couple months, everybody's like, this sucks, this sucks, this sucks. Well, you're locked in for a year. I think we were locked in for 2. And we ended up buying ourselves out of a year of it to be able to correct it. But just being able to go to folks and have them tell you that this is not working for us, and to be able to tell them, here's the constraints. Here's why we made the choice we did. Here's the constraints we have now. We're going to fix it at this point in time. Allows people to at least understand instead of, a lot of companies just say, go find your own, or you're stuck with it. What do you want from me? At least I'm providing healthcare. But we try to be transparent and share. Yeah, we agree, but here's our constraints. Here's when we will address it. Keep the feedback coming.
What do you think have been the greatest contributors to your success?
Luck.
It's always an aspect of it. I think hiring people that are smarter than you early and often, right? So we've been able to build a really good team, being thoughtful about what you want to be. So I see Mark in the audience. We hired him recently. He joined our team for leadership development. Most companies our size don't have a leadership development position, but that's something we value. Jorge hit on it at the very beginning of this. We value people and our growth of our people. We think that's what's going to be a differentiator for Mile 2 long term. And investing in positions like that, or creating positions like that, and then being able to recruit top talent like Mark to execute it, and trying to stay out of his way while he's doing it is I think, a major differentiator in our success. We're terrible capitalists. We don't try to squeeze every dollar out of it, but we're trying to grow something that's different, that you don't have to be, ruthless to be successful. You got to be good, but you don't have to be ruthless.
Do you have anything to add to that?
No, I think that's a good chunk of it, right? Luck plays a good bit of it as well, but like I said, preparation for it, being willing to just keep going is a good driver of our success. and I think the company shares some of the values. They see them as important. So at least we can get people to get on the same page and try to row towards the same direction together.
Has the pandemic affected your business at all?
Yeah, in a lot of ways. So, I mean, our best customers are collaborators, and when you can't get together, that's hard. When you can't, transition from that project to let's go have a beer, and spend an hour talking about, things in a more informal way, that makes life a lot harder. We moved into the Manhattan, or made plans to move into the Manhattan, moved in May, and we have 21,000 square feet, but everybody's working from home. So yeah, it definitely makes a difference. I think fundamentally business-wise, what we were able to do is prove that we could do this in a distributed fashion and still be successful bringing value, which allowed us to open the talent pool. We now have people that work for Mile 2 that live in Portland, Maine and Portland, Oregon, right? So they're everywhere now, and that opens up the talent pool, which allows us to bring even more value to our clients.
Am I on here? Yes, okay. Talk to us about remote teams. You guys weren't remote before. How are you managing that remote environment now?
So we were always flexible, but we weren't remote, and we definitely weren't fully remote. A lot of it's just infrastructure. So again, having good teammates that are willing to go explore, try some things out, and come back with recommendations. We were a huge whiteboard company. You walk around our office, and everybody was standing at a whiteboard, taking turns to doing those kind of things. Okay, what are the best digital whiteboard options, right? So we did some exploration of a couple different products and landed on Miro. So we use Miro boards in all kinds of ways that they're probably not designed to be used at this point. I think it's just about building a culture of adaptability, and people will go help you figure out what that looks like and what's working and not working. I think it's a lot easier when we had one remote person for a while, and that's really, really hard, but when the proportion shifts, it makes it a little easier to be more thoughtful about those things.
So yeah, the big thing that that we've missed out on is a lot of those happenstance meetings where you're leaving a meeting, people start talking about what's the next thing and whatnot. So during last year particularly, we started to have even our social events being done remotely. So we'd have like virtual happy hours and stuff that we would host, and people are just getting together socially through those. Those seem to be they dropped off for a while, and they seem to be kind of picking back up again from what I've been seeing. But doing events outside, and we send out care packages for people that are remote. Whenever we have new T-shirts, right? Like we send T-shirts out to people. This one's actually a couple generations old already, but I still have it in the rotation. But it's that type of thing, right? So it's caring about people even though you can't see them in person.
Yeah, so shout out to Liftoff Entertainment for helping us set up virtual bingo and virtual trivia nights. So you have some firsthand experience working remote this summer. You want to share any of that?
Yeah, sure. Actually, so I'm originally from Puerto Rico. I decided to take the family down there for 2 months since everything was going to be remote. And we spent 2 months living down there, and I was completely remote, right? I usually come into the building at least a couple times a week. But coordination-wise, it's just a lot harder because you don't see people face-to-face. Sometimes you start feeling like there's some disconnect that you kind of have to follow up on, right? So the personal aspect just needs to be a lot. You need to work harder on it. So the company allowed me to do that. We spent time remote, and it still worked out. Right? So, yeah.
That's lovely. Okay, we got a few more minutes before we wrap up. Does anyone in the audience have any questions they want to ask? What was your new customer acquisition like at the beginning when you first got rolling?
So a lot of it is about reputation, right? So I was in the Air Force, and then I worked at AFRL for a grand total of about 15 years. I knew a lot of people. So a lot of our early customer acquisition was people trying to support Mile 2 through word of mouth and making recommendations. Our first project was one of these like 3-node jumps to actually get the work. But someone I had worked with in the government who was still in the government, it's like, hey, I heard you left, let's go get coffee. So went and got coffee. He's like, you know these guys, Brilligant? You know, it's a company over in Fairborn. They're pretty cool, you should talk to them. So go have a beer with them. They're like, oh yeah, this company that we work for on this contract, they need front-end development stuff. Let me introduce them to you. And that actually led to like 3, 4, 5 projects. So networking and reputation is a huge advantage for customer acquisition. Again, unless you're selling a product that you can exquisitely tell people this is why it's this much better and going to last this much longer, we're selling expertise. So you got to have people in many ways vouch for it. These guys are smart. What they do does bring value. I've worked with them. You should work with them too.
So that was actually a really cool meeting. That's like the first meeting that we went into that was like a slam dunk, right? We went in there and I'm like, Jeff, you're actually really good at this, aren't you? He's like, yeah, this doesn't happen every time. But we hit a home run with that one. So that was good.
Question. Anybody else? Yeah. What do you mean by culture?
So for us, it's a couple of things, I think. We very early on said we wanted to do cool stuff with cool people and kind of use that as a framework of who are the kind of people we wanted to work with in Mile 2 and with as Mile 2. And it's just people that are curious, people that have hard problems that they're trying to solve. So those things started to branch out into, we actually sat down and talked about our values. Like one of them supported autonomy, right? So we want to bring in really smart people and give you the freedom to go do really smart things, but we're going to support you, right? We're going to surround you with infrastructure and people and expertise to make sure that you can do the best that you can. What's another way to like things like success is a team effort. It's really, really easy in business to become individualistic. One person wins, another person loses, right? So when we talk about team effort, that's how we define success. That's how we define bonus structure. Like if one unit does well and the other unit does poorly, everybody lost, right? So you don't reward the ones that are just the winners and then punish the losers per se, because it's a team effort, right? So looking at the world through those kind of lenses is how we define our culture, and it shapes the way people behave. That's what it really for us is. Your culture, I forgot how they phrase it, but something is like the way people express their behaviors within your organization is your culture. So we try to use those values to guide people's decision making, their thought process, the way they engage with other people.
Right, so we have a defined set of values that we encourage our people to read, and we have them blasted throughout the whole building. But the big thing is, how do you interact with other people in the organization? So it comes from everywhere from like Jeff's level to, you know, the interns that we hire, right? Like we expect people to be good to each other, and then you just kind of fit within that framework of the value system that we've set up, and that's the expectation that we have for people.
I think that's one of the drawbacks to remote work, right? So early on, when we were all in the same office, they could see that I was approachable. They could see how I interacted with other people to kind of set some of those cultural norms. When everybody's in a Zoom call and not everybody can see that, like those incidental interactions, I think that's made it really, really hard. And I think these things are funny, but you get these weird comments like, you're intimidating. Like, why am I intimidating? Well, you're big, you know, you're tall, and that, you know, these kind of things, that makes you not approachable just by default. So not being able to kind of demonstrate that in front of people and doing that in a virtual manner is really, really hard. Jorge's quiet, right? And that can be intimidating too. It's like, he's kind of short, not physically short, but short in his communication style and quiet. So can I really go poke and say we're doing this wrong? So that's something we've been trying to overcome a lot lately, and it's taken a lot of energy, is convincing people that it's okay to say this isn't right, you know, and getting all these people that have joined us recently during the remote stage who've never seen that because we're like, well, of course we're approachable. And everybody's like, those 80 people that we hired in the last 2 years don't know that, right? They've only seen you in stand-up or in a Zoom call. So finding ways to make that true has been really challenging and important.
Well, I appreciate everything that you guys have shared today. It's been a fascinating learning experience for so many of us. We can relate to the different stages of your journey, and it gives us guidance on other things that we might face as we grow. We're coming to a close today. I know there'll be a bit of a break, but please help me in giving a big round of applause to Jeff and Jorge of Mile 2.